Happy Friday, everybody. I'm coming here today, this Friday. What is it, March 19th, 2021, to recap what has been a week of conversations. Some of you know that I host a show called Context and Clarity that happens every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. It also happens to be a podcast, short form podcast, 5-7 minutes, something like that every day that touches on a topic. And it's a coffee talk inside of the Clubhouse app, inside the Context and Clarity Club on the Clubhouse app. We pick a theme every week. And inside that theme, of course, is a topic every day. And each one of those topics are need to know topics for you, for your success, for your business, for your relationships, for your ability to lead. And the theme that we have had for this week has been emotional intelligence. So we've spent an entire week talking about different facets of emotional intelligence. So I thought I would just come back and go live here on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitch today to basically recap the week. Maybe give you a few of the takeaways, my own takeaways from the conversations this week. And I invite you to share. I want to make it really clear. I am not an expert on emotional intelligence. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I am simply someone that's here to facilitate a conversation. So if you are an expert and you would like to weigh in, you would like to share, please do so. The comments are there for you no matter where you are, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch. If you have questions, concerns, if you have tips or tricks concerning emotional intelligence, drop them in the comments. I'm happy to hear them. I'm happy to read them. I do want this to be a conversation. That's the purpose that's the goal of all of these conversations that I host. So let me introduce myself real quickly. My name is Jeff Eccles. I'm the President and Chief Strategy Officer of Echo Engagement. I'm also the Director of Brand Strategy at Entree Architect. And Context and Clarity is a product, is an effort of Entree Architect. So our audience for Context and Clarity is generally architects. So 5 days a week, Context and Clarity streams live inside the Entree Architect Community Facebook group. If you're an architect, I'd encourage you to join that group. It's a great community. It's a nice, safe place to have conversations only with architects. No one else in there but architects. So you can talk about architecture, you can talk about your business, all kinds of things inside there. Once a week on Thursdays, I have a co-host, Catherine McPhail, and we simulcast Context and Clarity out across all the internet, to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to Twitch, to Twitter, or to YouTube. And we have a special guest every week for that Thursday afternoon show, 4 p.m. Eastern. Yesterday, our special guest was Enoch Sears. He's the founder of the Business of Architecture. He is an architect. He's also the longtime host of the Business of Architecture podcast. And we talked with Enoch yesterday about emotional intelligence. Like I said, I have these conversations. So if I added this all up between the podcast, between the Clubhouse rooms, between the live streams, I have 15 conversations every week on the topics of context and clarity. I decided, because of the theme for this week of emotional intelligence, because of the importance of emotional intelligence to all of us, it doesn't matter if you're an architect. Emotional intelligence is important if you're an engineer, a dentist, an attorney, an accountant, some creative professional, a design professional. Emotional intelligence is so important for our lives, for our relationships, for our businesses. I decided to give it a shot and try to do a LinkedIn Live and a YouTube Live and a Twitch live stream every weekday afternoon this week at 2 p.m. Eastern, just to talk about the same things, maybe to a different audience, just to see if I can gain any traction outside of the context and clarity brand, if we want to call it that. So I've been covering the same topics, same theme every weekday this week here at 2 p.m. Eastern. That means 20 conversations now, one yet to come because context and clarity happens at 4 p.m. Eastern, but 20 conversations this week about emotional intelligence. So what did I learn, right? What did anybody else learn? What did we share this week? And I do want to stress that if you've never been a part of context and clarity in one of its forms, it's incredibly engaged. This morning on Clubhouse, I would say we had about 25 people on Clubhouse talking about emotional intelligence on a daily basis inside or on context and clarity at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll have a couple of hundred or more comments in an hour as we discuss whatever the topic of the day is. And of course, every day this week, some facet of emotional intelligence. So these are very engaged conversations. It's not me talking, it's me facilitating conversations. And that's what I want to do today. If anybody is willing to join this conversation, I welcome you. Let me share a few takeaways. On Monday, I love to start these conversations with questions. So on Monday, I asked the question, how do we get to know our clients better? So essentially, the empathy facet of emotional intelligence. And one of the things, maybe the most important things that we learned in that conversation was the necessity to have great conversations, the necessity to ask great questions and then be quiet. Ask a great question, a deep question, be quiet, leave some space, and listen. Let that client, that prospect, whoever they are, answer the question, expound on the answer to the question. It's really important to dig deep into where they're coming from, who they are, what makes them them, and to listen and to understand that we're different and that's okay. And to look for places where we have alignment. So some tips that came out of that conversation on Monday about empathy and how do we get to know our clients better. And again, this isn't about architecture. This is about engineering. It's about professional services. It's about creative services, design services. This is for doctors, attorneys, accountants, graphic designers. A few tips that came out of that conversation on Monday were talk to somebody that you don't know. Have those conversations, ask those questions, and listen. Do something that's important to that person, whether it's worship with them, work with them, volunteer with them. Put yourself in their shoes. Go to places that they value, whether it's a restaurant or a theater or some sort of event or activity. Basically, live their life as much as you can. Look for the differences and understand the differences and understand that the differences are okay. The differences are actually good. And then look for the similarities. How are we similar? What's the common ground that we can start to build a relationship on? So that's what we talked about on Monday. On Tuesday, basically being about a year after things started to shut down in the United States because of COVID, a little bit longer, where if you're in other places in the world, I went back to a topic that I covered on April 13th, 2020. I've been hosting Context and Clarity now for almost a year, every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern for almost a year now. So I don't know what that math is, but it's a lot of episodes, 200 and some episodes by now. April 13th, the question or the topic was about the different phases of grieving, the different phases that we go through in the midst of crisis. Denial and rationalization and acceptance and hopefully eventually growth. We talked about all of those things back on April 13th. And so I decided that because of what I was seeing, because of the fact that I remember conversations back in April or May of 2020, remember when this was all going to last like 8 weeks? there were people that were longing to get back to normal. And one of the things that struck me over the course of the last couple of weeks was the fact that there were a lot of people having that exact same conversation right now. They just really long. It's more than want. It's a longing to get back to normal, or whatever the new normal is going to be, whatever our new scenario is going to be. And it struck me that it's the same conversation almost a year later. I think some of that is caused by some of the reopening, right? Some states are reopening, some states are dropping some of the mandates and restrictions. Right or wrong, I don't know. I'm not here to make a judgment on that, but some are, others are not. People are starting to get their vaccine. I got the first round of the vaccine this week. I think with all of that comes a glimmer of hope. And I think that glimmer of hope has triggered that longing for getting back to something, getting to the new normal, whatever that is. And so I thought that it was important this week to ask the question, how are you? I know that a lot of us have been suppressing a lot of things for almost a year. I know that a lot of us have been disconnected physically, especially for almost a year. So I thought it was important to really talk about how you are doing, right? And ask that question, how are you doing? Part of emotional intelligence is understanding our own emotions. Part of emotional intelligence is understanding other people's emotions. So on Tuesday, we asked the question, how are you? And the encouragement that comes out of that conversation, wherever you are, whatever you are feeling, first of all, look at where you are, analyze where you are, figure out a way to be honest with yourself about where you are mentally, physically, and emotionally, and be honest enough and open enough with yourself to say, I need help. If you need help, if you look at yourself honestly, if you analyze where you are and you realize that you need something, you need help from someone, you need someone to listen, please admit that to yourself and then reach out to someone. Reach out to me. If you're watching this on one of these channels where you're seeing this, send me a message, right? Send me a direct message. I may not be able to help you, but I will be happy. Again, I'm not an expert on any of this, but I'll be happy to try to connect you with someone that is, right? So if you need help, please ask somebody, reach out to somebody. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway from our discussion on Tuesday. Wednesday, I asked the question, how do we get to know ourselves better? So again, sort of one of the major pillars of emotional intelligence, how do we understand our own emotions? And then how do we use that understanding to guide our behavior and our reaction and our socialization? And I think that's a really interesting concept. For you, if you're a parent, I think you can understand that pretty well, right? When we are talking to our children or reacting to some sort of situation or dealing with our children in some way, if you are a parent, if you've ever been a parent, you know that you might need to check yourself, right? There are some things that are going to come up that your kids are going to say, your kids are going to experience a situation, whatever it is, where you might need to say, hey, hang on a minute. Before I react to this, I really need to think, is this an appropriate response? Is this a response that's going to move this forward in a positive way? Somebody that was participating in the conversation on Wednesday revealed that they're working with an NVC coach, nonviolent communication coach, which is all about emotional intelligence. And the thing that they shared was this idea, this practice of the pause. So basically, pausing, taking a breath before you react in the moment to a situation. And I found that so very helpful. I found that to be an incredible idea, because the next time that I'm faced with a situation and I'm ready to react, right, I need to pause. I need to take a minute and say, wait, is this the appropriate reaction? How does that make me feel? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? How do I respond appropriately in this situation? And so I thought that was a great takeaway from our conversation on Wednesday. And then, like I said, Thursday, Catherine McPhail and I, we host the simulcast version of Context and Clarity Live, and Enoch Sears, founder of Business of Architecture, host of the Business of Architecture podcast, we talked about emotional intelligence. And I said at the outset, that may sound like a strange topic when I say our special guest is Enoch Sears, the founder of the Business of Architecture. Enoch Sears, the founder of the Business of Architecture. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. Wow, wouldn't we talk about maybe something more technical or something more concrete, something on the harder side of business? But there's a soft side, the soft skills of business, right? And some studies say that emotional intelligence will increase your value in the workplace by as much as 33%. Emotional intelligence brings great value to your workplace as an employee. Emotional intelligence brings great value to your work as a doctor, an attorney, an architect, an engineer. Emotional intelligence helps you be better at your job, at your craft, in your profession. And so when we talked with Enoch yesterday about emotional intelligence, he was very vulnerable. He shared a lot. He's very open about his journey and his relationships and the search for emotional intelligence and the practice of getting better, of developing greater emotional intelligence. So I thank Enoch, first of all, for joining us for the conversation and sharing everything that he did. And some of the big takeaways from that conversation are, number one, our relationships rely on as much emotional intelligence as we can pour into them. Number two, our businesses and our relationships with our clients, our customers, our patients, whatever we call them, rely on ever increasing emotional intelligence. Number three, our ability to lead depends on our emotional intelligence, right? Especially in the context of the last year or so, where 12 months ago, if you're a leader or if you're an employee, your boss probably said, you know what, there's no way that we could all work remotely. And then 2 weeks later, suddenly you figured it out. How do you lead in new scenarios? How do you lead when your employees are wondering whether or not their job is secure? How do you lead when everybody is concerned about health and everybody is suddenly home with their kids and working and studying from home? The importance of emotional intelligence in a leadership role cannot be overstated. And then finally, I think the final takeaway that I would like to share, and maybe one of the most important, maybe one of the biggest, is when we think about how we're connecting, right? Right now, we're connecting online, right? I don't see you. I'm looking at myself on a screen into a camera, and I'm pretending to have a conversation with you, right? When we jump on to social media, or since you're watching this right now, either on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitch, you may want to jump into this conversation, or you may watch this later and want to make a comment. And I would appreciate that. I would welcome your comment. But how many times have we said something in comments, right? There's a disconnect. There are layers of disconnect in the online environment, social media, email, whatever the platform is. So how much emotional intelligence do we need to have when we're on Facebook and we're responding to someone's comment? Think of all the complaints that we hear, and many of them completely justified. I'm tired of the mansplaining. Where's that come from? That comes from somebody like me responding to a comment with zero emotional intelligence, right? How important is it for us to have emotional intelligence when we're online, right? All of those complaints. This guy's a jerk. This guy responded, here's a senior person that responded to an emerging professional in a very condescending way. Why is that? Zero emotional intelligence in that moment, right? So I think that is one of the biggest takeaways of the week, right? There are a lot of big takeaways of the week, but I think about the environment that we're all working in, the environment that we're all responding in. There's new platforms that come out every day. I mentioned Clubhouse a few times, blowing up, brand new platform that wasn't even around this time last year. And suddenly it's the social media darling. There's always going to be new social media, new digital media, new platforms for us to connect on and through. And it's always going to be necessary to have emotional intelligence when we're responding in a different way, right? I've told this story before. I used to have a job in an office where I basically went to the office in the morning. I was in the office all day and I went home when I was done, right? I didn't need to go anywhere. So I rode my bike to work 10 miles one way every day for 10 years. And some of the things that I experienced over the course of 10 years of riding my bike to work were a motorist that's frustrated that I'm on the road that they're on for whatever reason. We've got a pretty good bike lane system here in Indianapolis where I live, but for some reason this motorist is frustrated, so maybe they'd yell at me. People have thrown things at me. In one instance, there was someone driving a car and I was trapped between their car and a high curb, and I looked over. I could see, you can, when you're riding your bike, you can feel the car. I looked over and I could see this driver visually measuring the distance between the mirror on their car and me. And I could see them intentionally clip my elbow with their mirror. Thankfully, that's pretty much the end of that story. But I also think about the fact that I think that in a nutshell is very, very similar to the way that we have to communicate today, because all of those motorists were empowered to do the things that they did. Maybe were even frustrated to do the things that they did because of the disconnect. They were in their protective bubble, disconnected from me, another human being just like them, but they decided to take these actions. And I also know that if we had been walking down the sidewalk together, there's no way that that person that yelled at me from their car would have walked up to me on the sidewalk or walked past me on the sidewalk and yelled at me, right? There's no way that that person that threw a drink at me, there's no way that if we're walking down the sidewalk that they would have thrown that drink at me. There's no way that that person that intentionally clipped me with the mirror of their car would have walked down the sidewalk and thrown an elbow, right, and clipped me on the sidewalk. It's that disconnect that gives some amount of anonymity, that gives some amount of protection. We've got that same thing when we're online, when we're on social media, even when we're communicating in some respect via Zoom and other formats. So I want to say hello to my friend Javier. Javier, thanks for joining me. Glad that you're here today. And anybody else out there, if you're watching this, say hi. Just say, hey, I'm here. Even if you don't have anything to say, even if you just want to listen in, just say hi. Yeah, that's always appreciated. But that's my big takeaway. I apologize for getting up on the soapbox, but I think that's I think the leadership aspect of it, how are we leading, right? Especially in this ever-evolving society, ever-evolving world, how are we leading? What kind of emotional intelligence are we bringing to our leadership? I think that's really important. I think communicating via all of these remote platforms, these digital platforms, because I do not believe that we are going back to the normal that we knew in January of 2020. I do not believe that everybody is going to go back to an office and sit their butt in a chair in an office the way they did in January of 2020. So we're going to continue to communicate differently and more in remote situations. So I think that's important. And then I think the importance of emotional intelligence as it applies to your profession, to your craft, to doing the best work that you can possibly do for your clients, for your customers, for your patients. I guess those are my three big takeaways from all of these conversations about emotional intelligence that we've had this week. Like I said, by the time 5 o'clock rolls around and I'm wrapping up context and clarity this afternoon, it'll be 20 conversations this week on these topics. So again, if you're watching this either live right now or at some point in the future on Twitch or on YouTube or on LinkedIn, first of all, again, to reiterate, I am not an expert on emotional intelligence. I'm not an expert on empathy. I've studied empathy a lot. I have a keynote called Ego versus Empathy, how the stories you tell are making you a commodity. If that intrigues you, reach out to me. Let's talk about that. But I'm not an expert. I'm here to facilitate conversations. That's it. That's my role. Like I said, my role with Echo Engagement is president and CSO. I work with professional services firms. My role with Entree Architect is director of brand strategy, and I host things like Context and Clarity and workshops and things like that. You can find my website. Obviously, I just had it on the screen. There it is, echoengage.com. But we can connect on any of these. Wherever you're seeing this, let's just connect on this platform. Send me a message. Send me a connection request, whatever. I'm happy to connect. And if you are, if you're on Clubhouse, right? If you're wondering, what's the lowest risk way for me to engage in these context and clarity conversations that you keep talking about, Jeff? Well, the lowest risk one is to go to wherever you consume podcasts and listen to very short form context and clarity podcasts. It's just a few minutes. Basically, it recaps yesterday's conversation and sets up today's topic. That's the format of Context and Clarity podcast. If you want to go further than that, check out season 1 of the Build Your Brand podcast. That's another of my podcasts. Season 2 is coming out soon. The next lowest risk, lowest investment connection would be on Clubhouse. So if you are on Clubhouse, go find the Context and Clarity Club. And every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, I host what I call a 30-minute CNC coffee talk. So 30-minute Context and Clarity coffee talk. We take the topic of the day and we talk about that topic live, right, in real time, in our own voices via Clubhouse. This week, we've been talking about emotional intelligence. Next week, we're going to talk about human communication, especially in the face of a world where many of us are getting deeper and deeper into technology. How do we communicate better on a human level? Thursday, our special guest, Catherine and I, on Thursday, we will host Brian Kramer, TED speaker, great keynote speaker, best-selling author. He's written the book Human to Human. He's written the book Shareology. And we're going to talk about communicating as human beings in an ever-increasingly technical world. So next week, we'll be having these conversations about connecting as human beings. So if you're interested in any of those, connect with me on one of these platforms. Send me a message, send me a connection request, join one of these conversations, comment on one of these conversations. I always appreciate it. I always appreciate the engagement. To me, this is the new future. This level of engagement that we can have live in real time, whether it's live stream or even in person. This is how we need to be connecting, and this is how I plan to connect. So thank you to all of you that are out there. Javier, thank you for saying hi. Appreciate you being out there. I always appreciate you. I appreciate all of you that are out there consuming this. The one thing I ask is that you become a part of the conversation. Right? My goal is not to hear myself talk. My goal is to engage with you and bring you into the conversation, because it just makes a richer, deeper conversation. So thank you for joining me. Again, it's Friday. Have a great weekend wherever you are. I'll be back again Monday. So look for announcements about that. Be well, stay well, keep everybody close to you safe and well, and breathe a little bit this weekend. Come back again Monday morning, ready to go at it, rejuvenated and ready to do it all again.